Hi, my name is Brianna Townsend and this is my improv presentation. So I'm going to be talking about what we have done this year in our improvisation module, what we have done in our classes, what I have learnt, what I've struggled with, and then reflect on the recital that we did at the end of the year. So this module was a rather hands-on module, which I absolutely love. Every single lecture, whatever we learnt, we had time to really implement it and learn from it and make sure that we really understood what we were doing. So we'd go away, do it, come back, and would get our lecturers would tell us what we managed to do correctly, what we didn't, and then help us if we were struggling, which I absolutely love. I learn very well in that way. We also had multiple guest lecturers, which was fab, just something fresh, new people who are out in the industry coming and giving us advice on how to do what it is that we wanted to get done from this module. Improv is something that I have done before this year, however I've definitely expanded on it on a whole other level this year. I found that coming to whenever I had to do scat as a style of improv, so rather than using words, which is what I usually would do within improvisation, so scatting is using different sounds. And I noticed that a lot of the time before this year I would always go to my like B's and D's, like those sounds especially. So I didn't really have an ad-lib dictionary, I guess you could call it. So specifically like the lecture by Dion this year, one of the other lecturers in our university, I found that one very useful as for her speaking about, preparing yourself and making sure that you do have this kind of dictionary of things that you can use. Improv, of course, is doing something there on the spot, but that doesn't mean that you can't have certain phrases and lines or like knowing that you like to use a particular mode or something. It's good to be prepared, at least in some ways. She also spoke about, picking different sounds, so not just sticking to your B's and your D's. So maybe trying different vowels and stuff like that. So I learnt that a lot this year. So like maybe using like ooh ba 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 dee dee dee. So just like different kind of sounds that I maybe wouldn't usually use. I noticed this year a lot I started using like kind of tongue trills, so like which is a little bit different, but there we go. It keeps the listener interested, and that was really cool to learn about. Another thing that Dion spoke to us about, as vocalists especially, but works for anyone who is doing a solo, is that do not be afraid to leave gaps, to leave silence, because you don't have to be pushing it the whole time. It's like you can bring this light and shade, not just by dynamics, but by just leaving bits like empty, so when you come back in there's something more, a little bit more playful, something more interesting. It keeps people, keeps them engaged, and not being afraid to maybe try things that you wouldn't usually do. Like I wouldn't tend to do octave jumps and stuff like that, so she's like, don't be afraid to try things that you haven't done, and don't be afraid to get it wrong, because you can resolve it. If you do it twice or repeat your mistake, then it's not a mistake anymore. So I found that really good advice to go forward, kind of trying to, I'm a lot more experimental now, so my improv has changed a lot because of that lecture. So one of the other guest lecturers that we had this term was a guitarist called Christian Carpenter. He was very interesting and had some really good points that I actually took away and try to use now. One of those especially would be that he spoke about when you're soloing, or as vocalist if you're scatting, that you try and add in elements of the tune that you've been using. So whatever the song is, whatever the most prominent tune is, melody line in that you kind of work around that you play with it. Exactly what he said was, people remember tunes, not solos. If you highlight the tune, they will connect with it. And that's so true. I find that personally myself when I'm listening to a solo, that my ear likes to connect to something I'm familiar with. So that is something that I've tried to implement more with my soloing since that lecture. So another two phrases that he used was cooking and recycling. So cooking was to do with like adding flavour to your solos. So whether you use like different modes, different scales and stuff like that, like adding flavour. But you want to be careful not to add too much flavour, otherwise the listener won't understand what's happening, what's going on. They won't be able to understand the taste of it. And also with recycling, that goes with the last point of maybe sticking with a tune and stuff like that. You can take something that you're familiar with and recycle it, break it up, like do different things, but use the elements that you have, what you've got in your basket, and making something new with it. So something else that we learnt that was very important with improvisation is the communication between the group. As if you don't always know, because it is improvisation, we may not set a specific amount of time for each solo. In many songs we did do that. We'd say that you would have 4 bars or you'd have like 18. There'd be a set amount, but sometimes it would be open to, if this person's doing something very creative and people are engaging with it, then we want to allow them to keep doing that. So keeping eyes on people and communicating was very important. Especially learning how maybe some people communicate differently. Some people are quite vocal, or for some people it may be like a little nod. So it was just learning off each other how we would be communicating these changes in sections, or who was having the next solo, etc. So I'm gonna insert a few examples of how we did this in our improvisation gig now, and I'll discuss them in a moment. So that one there was clearly an example of Robin, who was quite vocal with her cues. Very specific. She said one more, that could not be mistaken for anything else, and we knew that after that time we would come straight back in with whatever the next section was, and that was very helpful for you can't miscommunicate it. So that was her way of communicating mainly in this. So that first one there for me was quite a subtle one, just a little like, yeah, it's your turn. So I find like in a band setting, that's usually how I'd communicate mainly, if everyone's very aware of what sections are coming next. But my next bit of communication is a little bit different, so. So that one there was a very vocal way of communicating, not just to the band but to the listeners. And although that could be seen as it's very good from a performance aspect that you are introducing your band, especially within the context and genre that we were doing at Improv, but actually what people might not have thought as much was that was really for us. That everyone knew where their sections were, where they were soloing, when they were finishing. So we decided to make that quite a vocal part of the performance, but actually works really well as a performance aspect too. So thank you for listening to my improvisation presentation. I have really enjoyed this module this year. It's a shame it's over, but I look forward to being able to implement what I have learnt into my performances in the future. Thank you. Bye.